Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us. My name is Kevin Carlucci, and I work at the Climate Investment Funds. And it's a real pleasure to welcome all of you to today's session titled From Insights to Impact, Lessons and Evidence for Adaptation and Resilience Program Design. I'd like to begin with a line that feels especially relevant to the moment we're in today. Last year, the UN Secretary General said, "Adaptation is not a choice or a distraction for mitigation. It is a necessity for survival and for sustainable development." For those of us who have worked in the climate space for many years, we know that mitigation often captures the spotlight. It benefits from the clear global public good narrative, a standardized metric in greenhouse gas emissions, and relatively straightforward commercial pathways, particularly in clean energy investment. Adaptation, by contrast, is inherently more complex. Its impacts and solutions are deeply localized, and its benefits don't lend themselves to a single headline metric. And its multi-sectoral nature, spanning agriculture, water, infrastructure, health, financial systems, fiscal stability, it makes it more nuanced and at times overwhelming for policymakers. Adaptation requires systems thinking, cross-ministerial coordination, and sustained institutional capacity, not just monetary investment. At the same time, climate impacts are no longer abstract projections. For many countries, resilience is now as much a macroeconomic issue as it is an environmental one. And yet, adaptation finance continues to fall short of the documented needs. In that context, evidence is not simply a reporting requirement for programs, it's essential infrastructure for decision-making. Today's session is about how learning and evaluation can shape forward-looking programming, not just assess past performance. So how does evidence actually move adaptation forward? Both the Adaptation Fund and the Climate Investment Funds have built strong legacies in climate adaptation programming, grounded in monitoring, evaluation, and learning. The Adaptation Fund has approved nearly $1.5 billion across more than 100 countries, pioneering direct access, community-based adaptation, and results-based management. Its emphasis on country ownership and real-time learning has generated practical insights into what drives effectiveness and innovation in adaptation programming. Similarly, CIF, through the pilot program for climate resilience, invested nearly $1 billion across 31 countries into regional programs, showing how a programmatic approach can embed resilience into national planning, institutions, and budgeting systems. Lessons from the pilot program for climate resilience shaped CIF's next generation resilience program, ARISE, which advances country-led investment planning, closer engagement with ministries of finance, and mobilization of public and private capital. We'll hear more about ARISE shortly from my colleague Chitembo. So with that in mind, what are we hoping to unpack today? Next slide, Brittany, please. We're going to approach this conversation from three complementary perspectives. First, we'll hear directly from the funds themselves, reflecting on key lessons learned and how those lessons are actively shaping new programming. Second, we'll turn to our partner countries with local experts from Rwanda, Angola, and Belize, because ultimately evidence only matters if it translates into policy and budgeting decisions and implementation on the ground. And third, we'll hear from the MDB perspective, joined by a climate expert at the Inter-American Development Bank, as we look into how evaluation evidence informs scalable public and private sector resilience investments. Taken together, these perspectives will give us a full view of the ecosystem from the fund level to country implementation to large-scale financing. So let's begin with the first piece of that conversation and introduce our speakers. First, from the Adaptation Fund, I'm pleased to welcome Justice Musa, climate change specialist, who will lead off our conversation today. From the CIF, my colleague Chitembo Chunga is the lead of our resilience portfolio. Calling in from the Rwanda Green Fund we have Emily Iwasi Karabushi. Calling in from Angola, ADPP, Mr. Avaristo Waya. From the Protected Areas Conservation Trust in Belize, Mr. Eli Romero. And last but not least, calling in from the Inter-American Development Bank, Climate Lead Specialist Alfred Grunwald. So with that, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Justice Musa, Climate Change Specialist at the Adaptation Fund. Over to you, Justice.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. As Kevin said, my name is Justice Musa. I'm a climate change specialist at the Adaptation Fund Secretariat, working with the Resource Impact and Knowledge team. My colleagues and team members have joined the call, and my team lead, Neha Sharma, is on the call. So throughout the presentation, please feel free to send your questions, and they will be responding to some of those questions. My presentation today, building on what Kelvin has already indicated in the introduction, I would share a brief introduction to the Adaptation Fund. I'm sure there are few people that will be on the call that might not know the Adaptation Fund and what it does. And for that matter, I'll throw light on that. Secondly, I'll look at how the fund resource-based management system operates, because it is that system that allows us to generate evidence to inform programming and project implementation. Then I also look at how insights and learning from portfolio monitoring really support our new programming and continuous project implementation. Then finally, how evidence inform, of course, programming and portfolio management. Next. So for the Adaptation Fund, it was established around 2001 when the COP made a decision, but it started operation in 2010 when the first project was approved. So over the past 16 years, the Adaptation Fund has approved projects across the 4 major regional blocks: Eastern Europe, Latin America, Africa, and Asia Pacific. But the fund was established to assist vulnerable developing countries to meet adaptation costs by financing concrete projects and programs. Projects that are country-driven and based on the needs and priorities of eligible countries. So the most important factor here is vulnerability. So if you look at our portfolio across the globe, you will notice that about 50% of the Adaptation Fund portfolio are in countries with unique circumstances and highly vulnerable to climate change, which is LDCs and SIDS. So the Adaptation Fund actually is a leader, innovator, and a catalyst for adaptation that is providing grant-based financing for financing climate change projects. So we have only one single financing instrument: no debt instrument, no concessional loan, no senior guarantee or junior guarantee. Everything that Adaptation Fund provides is basically grant-based. It is therefore important for us to be able to generate evidence, aggregate impact, and be able to report back to our donors and our stakeholders regarding the impact the fund is making on the ground, which of course would increase the commitment from our stakeholders to continue to put fund in the fund to be able to provide finance to countries. Next. So today I'll be discussing with you the framework or the system that allows us to be able to generate the evidence to be able to inform programming and project management. So the business context within which this resource-based management operates is that the Adaptation Fund programming process is country-led. It is country-led because each country faces unique circumstances in terms of capacity level. It also has diverse needs. So we want to have a system where, though we are financing projects across countries with unique circumstances, with diverse needs, we are still able to generate evidence and be able to aggregate such evidence to support decision-making. And we also know that programming and implementation deals with broad spectrum of climatic and non-climatic uncertainties that require flexibility across project cycle. For that matter, we need to have a system in place that allows us to be able to examine what is happening and know what is working and what is not working. Then we'll be able to make changes along the line to ensure that we are able to build the resilience that is needed. So the system, the resource-based management system that Adaptation Fund has is basically agile, is sector agnostic. You are able to apply it across all sectors, and it offers the necessary flexibility for programming and implementation that accommodates varied project types and contexts. It also enables projects to integrate new evidence, adjust activity during implementation, and continuously embed emerging lessons. And finally, it helps us to be able to aggregate impact that contribute to UNFCCC process. For example, the global stocktake that allow us to be able to examine where we are coming from and where we are today. Next slide. At the heart of the Adaptation Fund resource-based management system is the strategic resource framework. So the strategic resource framework has two main impact level resources. The first is that all our projects should contribute to increase adaptive capacity of communities to respond to the impacts of climate change, and or increase ecosystem resilience in response to climate change induced stress. So at the heart of this impact level resource are 5 core indicators currently, but we are undergoing a revision to the resource framework. And once we are finalized, which the board has already approved, but we are yet to implement, there will be 6 core indicators. And apart from these 6 core indicators, there are 8 outcome areas. So if you are developing a project, though there are different circumstances, varied needs of countries, your project must align with these core indicators and 8 outcome areas that allow us to be able to track progress that you are making at the project level, to be able to provide you advice in terms of the evidence that we are generating, and also allow the fund to be able to aggregate the impact it is making at the portfolio level and report to both the board and the COP to help further decision making. Next slide. So how does the strategic resource framework actually guide the project cycle? And I have divided this into 3 different sections. The first section is the project design. So once you are developing a project, the project must align with Adaptation Fund strategic resource framework. And it must include at least 1 core impact indicator. So at that level, it is more of compliance and quality assurance. And when we are reviewing your proposal, we want to see that though your country has a unique circumstance, your country has valid needs, that we are able to see alignment with our strategic resource framework, and at least 1 core indicator within our strategic resource framework align with your core indicator, and at least 1 outcome area and 1 output area is aligned. Then the second stage is the project implementation. Once you are implementing the project, we want to see the baseline of the project and the target that you have set at the completion, so that we can be able to track along the project implementation cycle how you are performing. Are there surprises that are coming? What are the changes that are needed? So at the time that you are submitting your project, of course, you could have a baseline, but at the time you are starting the project, you could update such baseline, and you can also update the target. So it's also compliance and quality assurance. But at the second stage, there is also monitoring and evaluation that is taking place to help us to be able to monitor the progress that you are making. And there is also adaptive management, where you could come back to the Adaptation Fund and request for changes to the project, resource framework, and we will look at it and provide you guidance as to how you make such changes. Then the third stage is evaluation. When the project is getting to completion, you need to do an evaluation for us to be able to know the target that were set, were they met? If they were not met, what was the underlying condition? What was the success factors? What were the challenges? So that these will inform future generation of pipeline development. And it will also help us to be able to provide advice to countries that are implementing similar projects in different parts of the world. Next slide. So what has been some of the lessons and insight that we've gotten from portfolio monitoring? And I will share just 4 with you. One of the things that we have identified from our resource management system is that projects are often successful, or you are able to ensure sustainability of the project when it has strong alignment with national priorities and there is country ownership. And I'll give you a typical example from Laos. We went to Laos and we noticed that the project that they were implementing in Laos has been extremely successful. So one of the questions that came up was to understand why that project was so successful. And we noticed that the country NAPS, the National Adaptation Plan, was in line with the project design. So almost all line ministries, departments, decentralized agencies also had their own priorities that were aligned with this project. So there was more interest, everybody was interested, everybody was involved, and it led to a successful implementation of the project. So projects that are firmly rooted in national priorities and development plans drives country ownership and enhanced implementation. The second item that we have identified is building on previous intervention. So when you develop a first intervention and you implement, and the lessons that you have learned from that in terms of what worked and what didn't work, you design the second phase of the project. You are able to put some of these lessons in place, so it really enhances the effective implementation of the project. And also project that has co-financing. Once there is co-financing from the government or from local entity, it means that one, it is in alignment with national priority. It means that there is local interest to making sure that the project becomes successful. So co-financing really also characterizes, effective implementation. Then the last is local content and community engagement. If you do not engage the community in the project design and the project implementation, there's high likelihood that you will not get effective engagement, and for that matter, the project might not be successful. So if you are able to ensure that these 4 factors are inclusive in your project design and implementation, there's more likelihood that the project will be successful and sustainable. Next. Then, what are the factors that weaken project effectiveness? The first we have identified from our various evaluation and our monitoring processes that when there is flaws in the project design, and a typical example is when the project has large geographical scope across the sub-project. So let's assume you have a project in Ghana, but this project has sub-projects in different regions, and there's the geographical distance between this sub-project is quite wide. It impacts monitoring. It is very difficult for the executing entity to frequently visit these project sites. So when you are designing a project, please look at the geographical distance between the various sub-projects so that it is not too wide that it will really impact, the frequency of monitoring. Then another thing that we have identified is projects that have very important components for women participation. If the project do not have proper gender analysis, there's a likelihood that the project will not be successful. And I'll share a typical example from East Africa. There was this project that was supposed to provide support for women to go into beekeeping, but the project didn't have strong gender analysis at the beginning. So during the implementation, they noticed that for women to participate in beekeeping, the hives must be kept on the baobab tree, and women will not be able to climb the baobab tree. So at the end of the day, women were not able to participate as expected. And if they were not to keep it on the baobab tree, they need to walk long distance, and they needed men to accompany them because of security reasons. So when you conduct proper gender analysis before the project is presented to the board, you are able to identify some of these challenges and resolve them before the project is approved. And for that matter, you get effective participation of all the stakeholders. Then weak monitoring and evaluation system. And I will share an example from Asia Pacific. We had a project that had about 4 executing entities that were part of the project. And these executing entities were undertaking different aspects of the project. They didn't have a common database system that they were sharing information. So they were not able to really coordinate well, and they were not taking lessons from each other. So it is important that there is proper monitoring and evaluation system across the implementing entity and the executing entity so that they can share lessons that they are getting along the line so that they will be able to coordinate well and implement the project successfully. And then sudden administrative changes, which are quite common across projects. For example, and I've decided to use regions instead of the countries. So in East Africa, we had a country where the government suddenly changed the administrative processes in managing donor funds. And it took a long time for that system to be finalized. So though monies were sent to the implementing entity could not send the money down to the executing entity. So this really also impacts project implementation. And in Asia, we had a project. At the time that the project was sent to the board, they didn't have agriculture insurance policy. By the time the project got approved, the country has developed a new agriculture insurance policy. and the project was not in line with agriculture insurance policy, they'd have to come back to the fund for us to be able to restructure the project to fit into the agriculture policy. So this also impacts the effectiveness, of the project in terms of implementation. And the last one, which you are very familiar with, is global crisis. When there are wars that impact global supply chain system, definitely it impacts projects that depend on this global supply chain system for inputs. So if you need some construction material and the supply system has been disrupted, it means that you needed to wait until there's stability for you to be able to get access to supply. And by the time that the supply system is restored, inflation has taken place, prices has gone up, impacting the cost of the various inputs. Then political instability, we have some few projects, and in some parts of the globe that have been impacted by political instability. And some of these are regional projects, and you could see that there is progress in the other countries that are quite stable, but the countries that have active military combat, these projects have stalled. And the last one is exchange rates, volatility, all these impacts our projects. So these should be at the back of your mind when you are designing a project. Next slide. So how evidence-informed programming and project management? And I'll share just 3 lessons and I'll bring my presentation to a close. Evidence helps us to be able to design and implement proper adaptive, management. And I'll give one example where we visited a project and we noticed that they have constructed large open well, and this water was not covered, and we noticed that it could lead to accident. Either somebody could jump into it or animals could jump into it. So we gave recommendation that, hey, you need to cover this. So this came from our monitoring mission. So the monitoring mission allows us to be able to identify things that are not going well, and we are able to give advice to the implementing entity to be able to make course correction. We also review our midterm reports, our project performance report, and when we identify that there's significant delays, there are changes in the results framework, we ask questions and we give proper guidance to the implementing entity to be able to implement the project successfully. Then in terms of portfolio learning loops, and I've already shared examples
about 1 minute left, okay?
Regarding the, thank you very much, I'll just end here. Regarding the gender analysis. So once we review all these reports and we notice that there are areas that you could do better, we provide advice to the implementing entity to take such into consideration. Then the last one is revision to our own results framework. Over the past 16 years, the lessons that we have gathered on the ground, we've used this to inform the revision to our results frameworks, because we have identified what is possible on the ground and what is not possible. What are the difficult indicators that implementing entities are not able to collect data? And we've made revision. And you will notice that our indicator on income and early warning system, we've made revision because over the years, we've noticed that there are challenges in terms of collecting data on income. So now we've made changes that the indicator will be at the household level. Then early warning system, we've noticed that indirect beneficiary related to early warning system, sometimes they say the entire population of the country. So we've also made changes to how we account for indirect beneficiary for early warning system. So this is how evidence, that we gather from the ground inform programming and project management. Thank you very much. I will end here. And if you have any question, we are happy to respond. The last slide is on our various knowledge products that are available. And please, you can visit our website, and there are several information from our annual performance report and various knowledge products that we have developed that could be very helpful to you. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you so much, Justice. We really appreciate all of the specific country examples as well to sort of ground your learning and some of your experience in the field. With that, it's my pleasure to invite Chitimbo Chunga, head of the Adaptation and Resilience portfolio at CIF, to reflect on how lessons from the PPCR program have shaped the design of the new ARISE program and the next generation of resilience investments at the CIF. Chitimbo, over to you.
Thank you, Kevin, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And it's a pleasure to share the platform today and share notes and exchanges with each other. We can go to the next slide. I just want to give a brief outline of who we are, who is the CIF, in case there are colleagues that are hearing about us for the first time. So the Climate Investment Funds was created in 2008. This was a construct of the G7 and championed by multilateral development banks and partner countries. And maybe to speak a little bit more about the multilateral development banks, we implement entirely through 6 MDBs. So in case there are non-government organizations or other institutions that may be wondering why they haven't been part of the implementation as an implementing entity, it's just because that is how we're designed, and we've kept that going forward. So why were we set up? What is it that we're supposed to do? In our mission statement, it's very clear. We want to accelerate transformational change. We want to advance climate finance so that we reduce emissions and develop on a climate resilient development pathway, ensuring there's justice and social inclusivity in our climate finance, delivering that. So that is, in a nutshell, what the Climate Investment Fund is coming from and where we're going. And I'm going to share in the next slide our current portfolio, what it looks like. So we are capitalized at 13.1 billion in 81 countries and over 463 projects since inception. And this is an active portfolio. We have a leverage ratio of over 1 to 10 across the entire CIF portfolio. And we're the first climate investment fund that set up a bond, and we have 3.5 with 0.5 billion coming from the bonds. So it's interesting to see how the evolution of climate finance is coming, and we hope that we can do similar things across the different thematic areas where we are operating in the CIF. We can move to the next slide. So coming from that portfolio of the entire climate investment funds, I'm going to zero down to what we focus on under the adaptation and resilience. What has been our work, where we're coming from, and why are we having this conversation this morning, afternoon, or evening? So in resilience and adaptation, we had the first generation program, the pilot program for climate resilience. Its aim was to help countries reduce their vulnerabilities to climate change, integrating resilience into its development planning, mainstreaming it at various levels of government in policies, institutional strengthening to respond to climate change. That was the aim of this program. And it was capitalized at let me just say $1 billion US. And we covered 31 countries with 93 projects. And we're as good as sunsetting this particular program. We'll share a little bit more on how this program has performed. What is it that it did? What did we learn from this program, together with multilateral development banks, together with the countries? One of the things I would quickly mention is that we surpassed all our targets that were set, and we've had valuable lessons learned along the way, both at global programming level and at country level and at community level for implementation. You will notice in the pie chart, the other side, it's showing you how many of the approved funding by region. Asia did get 37% of the resources, Sub-Saharan Africa 30%, Latin America 26%. And then the MENA region and Europe and Central Asia got the list. Not surprising, because of the impact of the focus on adaptation and resilience in these particular regions, whilst the other regions are highly skewed to focusing on mitigation efforts. We can move to the next slide, where we now delve more on what did we learn, what results did we achieve, and how has that informed our next generation, the ARISE program. So we are sharing with you today the key indicators, the core indicators that we had on this program. And what is it Did we achieve what we intended from the onset or not? The answer is overwhelmingly yes. And you can see in the column on achievement rate that all these indicators were surpassed. None of them are less than 100%. It's either 100% or plus. Key was, how did we support people to cope with climate change? What area in sustainable land and water management was supported to shift from conventional means to integrating climate resilience initiatives into managing our land, into supporting our water management? How did we protect areas from flooding, sea level rise, and different things? And how did we work with the local people through locally led adaptation, access, financing, infrastructure in hydromet and climate information, early warning systems, knowledge products, and studies? All these key indicators that formed a holistic program were surpassed. Now, that is on the results side, and that's great. It's amazing, and we're happy to see that the way the program was designed and being implemented, we're able to get these results. To complement this, which is very important for us, is undertaking independent evaluations. And from the summative evaluation, what did we learn from there? What have we been informed, and what were the recommendations? It's that we saw maximum impact when policy, capacity of institutions and personnel, and investment barriers were addressed collectively, not as individuals, not isolated cases, not a small project which just deals with an issue in the bigger program, but we followed a programmatic approach to ensure that we see where is the impact. If we don't deal with the policy, what will happen with the investments? If we just deal with the investments whilst the policy is hanging, what is the long-term impact? So we realize evidence has shown us that when the three were combined, that gave us maximum results. One of the things I should have mentioned earlier is at the CIF, we work through the climate. We put the countries as lead implementers. They design, they are supported by the MDBs. They bring the MDBs, all that support. They choose their priorities. They drive the implementation. And under the pilot program for climate resilience, even the results, the reporting system was such that the countries were able to report on their own in complementarity with the MDBs. And then we had global results. That was very good and very genuine. So since the countries set their own priorities based on their national adaptation plans or any high-level government documents such as National Development Plan, or now more recently with the Green Growth Strategies and various strategies that deal with resilience and adaptation, it anchored the investments in the National Development Planning System and budgeting systems. That was very important. Then that leveraged the constitutional finance that was provided by the climate investment funds. Something which is very important and great and going forward into the ARISE programs, that where countries, the engagement was directly through the ministries of finance to coordinate, to bring all these activities into their budgeting systems, into their planning systems, ensuring there's continuity and sustainability. And it was found that it was easier to integrate resilience considerations into all these systems, where ministries of finance were in the lead. However, they did work very well with all the supporting line ministries or corresponding line ministries. So we find that to be very strong for sustainability, for integration, and for long-term financing. Then another finding which came for the evaluation was early planning for scale and stakeholder engagement is key. It worked very well in some cases, and where this didn't happen so well, then we also could tell that the results were not as spectacular as in other places. Private sector. In our portfolio of the pilot program for climate resilience, the private sector did have access to financing along our investment planning process, which brings our stakeholders together, and then they need to implement through public finance systems and public planning systems. But we all have come to understand and appreciate that private sector operates at a slightly different way. because their timings, they need some flexibility, the type of financial instruments that they have access to, that they need to have access to could be different, and indeed they are different from what the public sector may need. So we learned a great lesson on how do we ensure that we bring the private sector engagement in a manner that is responsive to their needs, in a manner that they're able to invest in adaptation and resilience, in a manner that we take into account what is required. And when we're looking at private sector, we are looking at solution providers, financial providers. We're looking at private sector that is also able to integrate with the public financing to ensure that the investments in resilience and adaptation are stronger, and we're able to scale them and ensure that we reach that. So all these lessons from the results which were overtaken over the 16-year period of implementing the PPCR, including the summative evaluation, drive us to what we're going to see as summarized in the next two slides, what we're going to see in the ARISE program. Next slide, please. So just to give you a schematic view of how we work in the country based on the results that we've seen in the PPCR, and this is what we're going to do going forward into the ARISE program. Now, this is my left. So on my left, I think it's on your right, the national climate commitments, NDCs, national adaptation plans. These are key documents which at the country level, they need to inform what kind of investments they're going to put in. So we do not anticipate a country to come up with investing in a particular system for something which is not highlighted in the NAP or it's not highlighted in the NDC, because then we'll start investing in things that are outside the country priorities or outside what the very documents which underpin investing in adaptation and resilience are not. And we've seen that if we help countries to make their NDCs and NAPs investable, we're going to achieve economic development. And then we have country coordination function, which is supported by Ministry of Finance with other line ministries, MDBs, and all the stakeholders to implement the investment plan. We'll be providing technical assistance, which goes directly to the Ministry of Finance and all these supporting institutions to help with the policy and regulation and any capacity strengths that are required. And we'll be supporting locally led adaptation, public investments, and private sector. So what kind of instruments? They'll be varied depending on the country. Depending on the country that we're in, but there'll be grants, concessionals, and MDB and other sources of financing. We're contemplating bringing on board different types of funding, which we try to pilot. Please keep to our page and see how this program will be evolving. Private capital mobilization is going to be very key for us. We all understand that the ODA is declining, and we all have seen that there's return on investment in investing in adaptation and resilience. So we'll be focusing very carefully on how do we bring on private sector into adaptation and resilience. How do we help to de-risk the investments? How do we fund them? How do we work together with them? And how do we bring them into projects and financing? So there's a lot of work which will focus on mobilizing private capital for resilience. And my last slide, which is which brings all this together, it is the ARISE program, which is accelerating resilience investments and innovation for sustainable development. You will notice that this program is built on the results and on the evaluation findings from the PPCR, coupled with what the multilateral development banks have been working on, coupled on with IPCC findings and then others. But it's because we're relying on our own strength. We're relying on what we learned from the PPCR. What were these results? What was it telling us? So we expect these 5 themes to come out: mainstreaming resilience investments in economic development strategy and planning for the benefit of people, markets, and infrastructure. So the systems-based approach will be very critical and will be enhanced. We're not going to do any project by project, but we're going to do systems-based adaptation and resilience financing. Catalytic capital to unlock new sources of finance, and that's why we're very much looking forward on how we engage private sector more intentionally and more decisively this time around. We've mentioned about championing locally led adaptation solutions, empowering communities to unlock innovations. So much comes up from the communities, and we need to support them to deal with the investments that are required for adaptation and resilience. But looking at all this with benefiting the people, the markets, and infrastructure, that tells us that our aim is to ensure that in an instance of any physical climate hazard happening, we do want to see that the communities and the people and the supply chains are as resilient as could possibly be. With that, thank you so much, and look forward to any questions, comments, and let's interact.
Thank you so much, Chitembo. And before we move into our country reflections, let's just take a few short minutes for brief questions from attendees on the presentations from Justice and Chitembo. If you do have questions, just drop them in the chat. I think a few have been responded to already by Justice, it looks like. I'll just read from the bottom one here from Rahel Herman, GIZ. This can be towards, I'll ask Chitembo to respond to this one since Justice has responded to a couple of them. Rahel's question is, who are some of the key implementing partners of the resilience projects, and do local governments play a role? And how are those funds transferred to their level? So I'll just turn that over to you, Chitembo. It's local implementing partners and local governments.
Okay, thanks. So our implementing entities are multilateral development banks. So depending on which region you're in, it could be the World Bank, the IFC, the Asia Development Bank, ABRD, African Development Bank, and IDB. Those are our direct implementing entities. At the country level, working with the MDBs and the governments, it does depend on how the design of implementation of the particular program does happen. So sometimes let me speak for locally led adaptation. We've seen in countries where civil society organizations in the country are also part of the implementation process. Now, they get their access to financing through the projects that is designed with the government and the MDBs. So then it's not direct support from the CIF to the particular civil society organization or to the private sector entity, whether it's an SME or not. Within the design of the particular project, then they're able to be part and parcel of the implementing, depending on what role they are assigned to help with the implementation of the program. Do local governments play a role? They can have access to resources? Again, the answer is yes, but they do not directly sign. I think under the PPCR portfolio, we didn't see anything that we're a country where they did allow their local authorities to access resources directly, because they can't sign up for a loan or a grant with the MCF, which is the Climate Investment Fund in this case. However, depending on the region of implementation of your program, I'll give an example of Zambia, and I know Emily is going to share with us how they have designed their NPC program in Rwanda. I'll give an example of Zambia where there were investments at the local level to do what were they being called? District integrated resilient development plans. And in that, the local authorities were the drivers of implementation, of designing, of working with the communities, but the funds were flowing through Ministry of Finance, the project office, and then direct to the ministry, to the various districts that were in part, which is the local authorities, together even at a lower level of local authority, which they call the Ward Development Committees. So they do access. It is how it is designed, but not directly from the climate investment funds. I hope that's helpful.
Okay. Thanks, Chitimbo. And then just in interest of time, I'll take one more question that's here in the chat. This is another one for Chitimbo and Arise. This question says, many thanks for the CIF Arise presentation. Based on your experience, what will you be doing differently in Arise to get private sector flows at scale of adaptation and climate resilience? Any key examples would be helpful.
That's a $1 billion question. What are we going to do differently? One, we're going to engage them from the outset. So linking them to Ministry of Finance. There's an engagement side which has to deal with how do they come into play? How do they come to even understand that there's opportunity in adaptation and resilience? So those conversations with Ministry of Finance at the table and all other capable line ministries are going to be very key. Of course, with the support of the multilateral development banks. We're also hoping to help with Ministry of Finance and presidential delivery units, economic units, depending on the region we are in, various platforms for private sector engagement and participation have been created. So using those platforms, we need different instruments will be made available depending on the country context and the particular system they want to invest in, which is very critical for economic continuity, supply continuity. I'll give the simplest example is agriculture and food systems. Do we see private sector role in agriculture and food systems in extreme heat or droughts, or maybe not floods, but extreme heat and droughts? Is there a role for private sector in there? Can private sector invest in ensuring that we have continuity of access to food and food systems? So looking at that entirety, those are the conversations, and then structure the type of financing that can go to them. Of course, some may ask for grants for specific things, but that would be super limited, and it could be on a case by case. But what kind of loans, what kind of could be provided to private sector for them to be able to invest and be assured of a return on investment? Insurance and reassurance, those are areas where the private sector can go in, but it will require sitting together at the country, look at the country context, work with the MDBs and structure something that can work for that particular country. So there's a lot that we can do with the private sector, but it will be country context, but it can just give a broad overview of what it could look like.
Great. Thanks, Chitimbo. Okay, well, in interest of time, let's move over to our country panelists. There'll be another opportunity for questions here after the country panelists and Alfred from the IDB provide their interventions. So to start off with, we're very fortunate to be joined by Emily Uwasi from Rwanda Green Fund. And I'll pass it over to you, Emily. Thank you. Emily, if you're on, we cannot hear you.
I was muted. Okay.
Okay, fantastic. There you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Yeah, as Kevin mentioned, I'm Emily Uwase. I work for the government of Rwanda, and more specifically the Rwanda Green Fund, which is a national fund for environment here in Rwanda. Today I'll be presenting the NPC investment plan, which is our latest financing we got from the CIF. Next slide, please. Okay, so the process of preparing the IP, the investment plan, I always say, you need to be armed with patience because it took us about 2 years. So we first submitted the EOI late summer of 2022. When that was done, it was all well and done. We chose the World Bank as our implementing MDB and the African Development Bank as secondary MDB. They came for the first scoping mission in May 2023. We didn't go on the field. We just met with key government stakeholders, so the Ministry of Environment, the Rwanda Environmental Management Authority, some CSOs and some private sector members, just to really align, okay, this is where we are in our NDC implementation. Where would be, number one, the geographical location of this investment plan? What are the priorities? And it was just like a whole of government approach, really a good debate within various institutions to see where we will really get this $30 million invested in. After that, we did a joint mission where we went to the field visit. This was in the southern province of Rwanda. And then we had a joint workshop with the other MDBs, which was really a pleasure for Rwanda and a great success, because in the southern province, we also have the GEF8 project, and the GCF, it's called the Congo-Nile Divide project. So really, it really was, an honor to really see that, we were even expanding on the programmatic approach and not just, talking about it. And really, it was fantastic to see, the MCFs work together. After that, we worked with the World Bank for the IP preparation, additional field visits, looking at how much we're going to reforestation, catchments. I'll talk a little bit more about it later in the slides. And then lastly, in June 2024, it was endorsed by the GCAP. Now GCAP doesn't exist anymore in the CIF, so it will have been the SCF. So pretty much just endorsed by the board members, committee members of the CIF. The next slide, please. So quickly, the country context of Rwanda, and Rwanda is about the size of the state of Maryland. So very small landlocked country, but with over 40 million people. So if you really take out the protected areas, the forest, the marshlands, the wetlands, areas for agriculture and farming, really the land left for people to live in is extremely limited. So this is really our biggest issue in Rwanda. And that's why, adaptation is really country specific, because for us, landslides and all the tragedies that happen and the deaths is because people, are high up in the mountains in Rwanda, and when there's a little bit of flooding, they're extremely affected. So extremely vulnerable and really limited land. So land degradation, population that keeps on growing is really what we face. So every climate change is exacerbated by us already being vulnerable. Next slide, please. So, like I said quickly, the circled area is the southern part of Rwanda. As you can see, it's the poorest area of Rwanda, with 90% of the population living below $1 a day. Next slide. So quickly, we have already an investment plan in Rwanda. It's called the Sustainable Landscape Management. So it's kind of a tool, an investment framework that really says, okay, this intervention will happen at this site for this much. So it's really a costed investment plan that we already know what to do. So it's never like a surprise, NPC figure it out. So this was very good. And from that, we chose the two thematic areas: resilient landscape, that was number one, and resilient livelihoods. In resilient landscape is really improving forest management, integrated landscape management, and resilient livelihood is the adaptive capacity of the people in the southern region. Next. Okay, so in the two thematic areas, there were 4 key objectives. The first one and the biggest one, where we put I believe over 50% of the investments, is to restore degraded landscape. So you can see this used to really be a forested area, and it's just been totally degraded. Number 2 is to promote sustainable landscape management. Oops, I think I clicked the comment, sorry. Sustainable landscape management and the use of forest, sustainable use of forestry. Number 3 is to improve the diversity of rural livelihoods. We also have a very small instrument. I'm not going to talk about it much, but it's an innovative bond. We call the wildlife conservation bond. We used about 2 million to pioneer that. Next. Okay, so the components are, like I said, integrated landscape management. Component 2, ecological restoration of the priority conservation areas. The component 3, livelihood diversification. And the last component is the project management, monitoring and evaluation, capacity building, and gender mainstreaming. And so this is really what's made our CIF, Nature People Climate Investment Plan. Next. Okay, quickly, like I said, I just wanted to show you that, but the CIF financing was a total of 33 million, 2 million, again, it's the bond, but the 31 million majority just went to landscape restoration and integrated catchment. Again, Rwanda's main priority really is restoring degraded forest and the flooding. Next. Okay, so when it comes to a whole government approach, for the joint mission, we really talked because the Rwanda Green Fund, the National Fund for the Environment, we sit under both the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Finance, which are our bosses, and really our job is to mobilize resources. But we are aware that number one, implementing agencies are there. People who have greater experience, technical and sectoral experts have to have their input. So we talked to all the ministries: Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Emergency Management, Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. And we also talked to academia, the Rwanda Institution for Conservation Agriculture and the University of Rwanda. We talked to our sister institution, the Rwanda Water Board, the Rwanda Mining Board. We also talked to the Rwanda Development Board for the case of private sector and the Private Sector Federation. Rwanda Agricultural Board, but when we were on the field with the local communities, of course, we talked to all the district representatives and mayors of the three. These are the three districts in Rwanda in the southern region. The private sector as well. We talked to the Rwandan Chamber of Tourism and some key private sector players in agriculture. Yes, civil society and organization, WRI, and Africa, Wildlife Conservation Africa. For the development partners, we talked to all our bilaterals, so GIZ, DFID, JICA, etc., and as well as the Triple GI and the AFC. Next. So I think this is it. I think it's my last slide. Yes, exactly. So quickly, I know I'm rushing. I only have a few minutes, but it really was a pleasure working with the CIF and the MDBs, and they really provided really great technical feedback and expertise. At the time, Paul Hartman, who was the lead on the NPC, really gave us a very detailed understanding and help in structuring the NPC, and of course the World Bank with the technical expertise. We really didn't feel like they were imposing something on us. Again, it was really government led, and really we had the last word or decision when it comes to geographical location, when it comes to how much is allocated for each component, and now we are under implementation. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emily. Great presentation. I really like that last slide with all of the stakeholders that are involved in being integrated into the whole program design as well. It just shows how much effort it takes for the local implementing entities to really pull together all of the moving pieces to these programs. So thank you so much. Okay, now let's move over to our next country panelist. Next from Angola, we have Mr. Evaristo Waya, Senior Partnership Officer at the ADPP. Evaristo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you, other colleagues, panelists. And I will share our experience from our experience on ArtSwag project by saying that ArtSwag project has an objective to strengthen the climate resilience of smallholder farmers in semi-arid areas in Angola and Namibia. And this project is implemented by OSS, with the Observatory of Sahara and Sahel, who is having ADPP Angola and the DPP Namibia as the executing entity. Just to highlight that both ADPP Angola and DPP Namibia, they are member of the International Federation of Humana People to People. So for this panel, I will share some evidence how ArtSwag projects has influenced our national adaptation plans by saying that ArtSwag provided critical evidence for INAC, which is the National Strategic Plan for Climate Change, both for Angola and Namibia. And those evidence are demonstrated by community-based adaptation model that work at local level, participatory planning tools supporting evidence-based decision-making, integrated water and land management practices improving resilience, and also scalable models for national and regional replication. So those are like some key evidence that I want to share with you that are influencing our national adaptation or climate change strategies. And also I would like to highlight some institutional innovation, like from the AdSwag project. Also, we have some very critical innovation, like Community Adaptation Action Center, which serves like local learning and the coordination hub. The Green School program with environmental education and youth leadership, the capacity building that is strengthening local authority and the civil society organization, livelihoods, strength, introduced climate resilient income activity. And also I wanted to highlight the project steering committee that ensured oversight and the multi-sectorial coordination and the steering partnership between government, civil society, and the local communities. And also, I want to highlight some key challenges, like the low human capital and the very, very low development in some areas, with limiting capacity to adapt. And also, I want to highlight some barriers like literacy and basic access to knowledge and information. And also, we have a key challenge about poor infrastructure and the services and the access, especially in Angola sites. And also weak coordination between key sector and institutional. So a need for stronger integration of the project lesson in the policies. But I wanted to highlight some opportunity for scale up the intervention at the national level, integrate ArtSwag model into provincial and national development frameworks. And also on regional level, we can take the opportunity to integrate ArtSwag project through SADC platforms, and also promotes cross-border adaptation and shared ecosystem with Angola, Namibia, and Zambia, and also align with the African Union Climate Change and the Resilient Development Strategy 2022-2032. So those are some of the key fact that we wanted to share with the panel in this event. And also we want to highlight that the ArtSwag project is a very community approach. We start with the people, and all what we are doing on ArtSwag projects, the peoples are very important. And we have three components on the ArtSwag projects. We have a strengthening awareness, knowledge, and the capacity to adapt to climate awareness and variability at community districts, national and regional level. And also we have a component tool, which is organizational and technical learning for climate resilient production and water management. And we have a component 3, which is improving resilience of the ecosystem and livelihood through the implementation of community adaptation action to improve food security in response to climate change and variability. So for the first part of my introduction, I will stop here, but I will continue with also answering some questions from the panel. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Evaristo, and such a great example of a cross-border initiative in the Okavango River Basin between Namibia and Angola, and some of the complexities that come with that sort of transnational cooperation. Now let's shift over to our final country panelist from Belize, Mr. Eli Romero, Climate Finance Manager from the Protected Areas Conservation Trust. Eli, over to you, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Thank you to CIF and Adaptation Fund for giving us an opportunity to share our experience in relation to climate financing and specifically in data-driven decision making and project designs. The Protected Areas Conservation Trust is a accredited entity to both the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, and also most recently the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. So we're a parastatal entity that we have been established through a legislative framework through the government of Belize. So, as it relates to evidence-based supporting the design of projects and programs, I can tell you that PAC has really taken this to a little bit of a next level. So there was a project that we had worked on designing for a coastal community. Belize is a very vulnerable Caribbean country with an extensive coastal area in the tropical region. So we're vulnerable to various climate hazards, especially hurricane, storm surge, sea level rise. Um, so we were interested in mobilizing resources to really build the adaptive capacity of coastal communities to address significant erosion. Some of these communities have lost large swaths of land due to erosion. So what we had to do is because at the design phase, we needed to identify what were the different interventions that were feasible for the different scenarios in each of the targeted communities. So what we had done is that we, along with some other national partners, um, carried out a study to really look at what are the best interventions of beach restoration in targeted communities. This was done through an extensive and detailed study by a firm from Cuba. They have a really good expert team that help us design this aspect of the program. And this was part of a requirement of the adaptation fund for the proposal to be finalized and approved. So this study had to be completed. The one challenge with this is that the study itself come with attached financial requirements. So Belize, along with its relevant partners, source the funds to secure the firm to conduct the studies. But this really helped us to really inform the design of the program. So the program was structured in a way that it identifies what are the key contributing factors to the erosion? Where are the available sand that has been eroded away if it was feasible to return that sand to the beach? And what would be the long-term sustainability framework in terms of maintaining the beach from continuous erosion? So all of this was done through a separate study, but it informed the program. And now that we're on the implementation part, it's really following a lot of what the study guided us to do. So it really cuts a lot of time that you would have done to do all these studies during project implementation when it's done at the design phase. Another way of us really informing the development and design of programs is when we're also doing a risk categorization um, uh, um, and screening process. So a lot of these risks are also identified during this process, and it's important for us to be able to identify areas that will require additional support, studies, and data gathering. And where possible, those can be integrated within the design phase. Otherwise, they will need to be integrated during implementation. Um, in terms of challenges of translating policies into bankable actions, I think those they're impacted by a combination of different factors. So one is we often have a lot of policies developed for various reasons. Sometimes it is developed as a requirement for sometimes accreditation for us as an entity or government as part of bilateral or multilateral agreements. And this becomes a check mark policy type, whereby we often develop policies at the national, subnational level, but we never institutionalize or implement these policies and strategies. So I think though that's a big challenge that we always should try to get around with. It defeats the purpose if one, we spend all the time and resources to develop these policies and strategies just to be shelved. I believe that they're developed and designed so that they can make a tangible change in the lives and adaptive capacity of people. Um, another limiting factor and challenging in translating policy to action is really the limited amount of resources. And then we can divide the limitation in resources from a financial aspect, whereby countries develop a very robust policy or strategy, and we don't have the resources to implement. That is a challenge that many of the developing countries often are faced with. You need to balance what are the needs of your population compared to doing preparedness and taking proactive action. Another challenge in translating policies to action is the limited human capacity. Many of our developing countries have a limited human capacity, sometimes in very technical or expertise areas. That is a common thing in Belize, where a lot of times we need to source human resources and expertise externally, regionally, and internationally. That comes with additional cost, and sometimes that is a challenge. So, one of the things that we do as an accredited entity is how can we support the capacity building of our human resources in country so that we can start to do many of these things in country. Um, and then also changing priorities. And as many of you are from many of these developed countries, there's a challenge in changing priorities. And these can be in changes in administration, changes in management of the different organizations involved. Those can have significant impacts. Anytime we have a change in government administration, the priorities might completely shift. What happens with the priorities that were established previously? So those are integral to making sure that policy can be translated into action. And for that to happen, I think we need to have very structured and robust systems that will really address these challenges even before or mitigate for them from the design phase. And finally, when we're looking at scaling up and replicating, PAC has been able to implement a couple programs under the Adaptation Fund and also with the Green Climate Fund. And one of the things that we have identified throughout the process of developing and in scaling up is scaling up is something we think about from the design phase. A lot of times when we're developing a program, the first thing that when we start to do our mapping, we realize is that the available funds are limited to what is available. And that poses a challenge whereby the needs of the communities, the challenges they're facing are far beyond what the available funding can meet. So that on itself, at the design phase, we need to start to thinking about how can we develop a program within the available resources, but already thinking about how that can be scaled up. What are the things that we're going to involve in there that are going to create the baseline or create the foundation so that we can think about a scale up or a larger program, either if it's bigger than what we're doing or replicating it somewhere else. During implementation, there are a lot of things that are gonna come up. So when you design,
I have 1 minute warning for you. Thanks.
sure,
Just so we have one time. Thanks.
I'm almost done.
Okay, great.
So during implementation phase, you always identify shortcomings, what you could have done with more money. So that is another area that is easily used to scale up and replicate programs in terms of needs, shortcomings, and changing landscapes. That's very important because sometimes you design a program, but during implementation, things change. How do you adjust with that? And lastly, in terms of during project evaluation, during midterm or closure, you should identify what were some of your challenges, what were your opportunities for scaling up, and how those can be used as stepping stones to really building national climate resilience for your stakeholders. So those are my interventions. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Eli. Those are really wise insights from PACT. It sounds like you've had quite a bit of experience, so thanks for sharing those with us. Before we open for question and answer, I do want to move over to our third perspective in our conversation today, and that's from our colleague at the IDB, Mr. Alfred Grunwald, who will share a bit more with us around how investments in resilience are packaged and what the market looks like from the IDB perspective. So please, over to you, Alfred. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Can you hear me well? Yes, perfect. Well, I will first to thank you, CIF, for organizing this workshop, this space to share lessons learned. And thanks to my colleague, my colleagues for all the presentations, a lot of knowledge. I'm aware of the timing, so I'm gonna go as fast as possible. Could you please, my name is Alfred Grunwald. I work in the IDB as a climate change lead specialist. I have been involved with the CIF for a long time, implementing some of the programs, in particular one in Bolivia that is about to finish this year. Next slide, please. So I first would like to give you a brief overview on how the IDB has been implementing climate, or how we have been mainstreaming climate within our institutional strategy. Basically, we have embedded climate and resilience considerations in our institutional strategy at the core. As you see here from the graphic, in the center core, we have three main objectives, one of them being addressing climate change. In the outer shell, we have five main, let's say, objectives that are related to impact orientation, strategic selectivity, knowledge, of course, the combination of public and private synergies, and then, of course, having effective instruments and mobilization. I think that many of these aspects have been already touched by many of our colleagues from the presenters. I think that those five objectives fit very well with scaling up adaptation and also measuring adaptation and measuring impact. So focusing now on the strategic selectivity, there are two important aspects here. One is the mainstreaming process that happens at the territorial level. We conduct dialogues with our counterparts. In the case of MDB, in particular Latin America, for the Inter-American Development Bank, our natural counterparts are the ministers of finance. So basically, as part of the process of developing country strategies with each one of our member countries, we establish a very open dialogue. And as part of that dialogue, we make sure that all the information that is embedded in the NDCs and the NAVs and other instruments, policy-related instruments that the countries have on climate is part of this process of developing the country strategies. So that's one. And the second one is, of course, planning at the sectorial level. The sectors develop what we call a thematic framework document, and that thematic framework document basically establishes priorities for the sector. So at that level, we also make sure that climate is mainstreamed, in particular resilience and adaptation, but pretty much centered on the focus of the development goals that each sector has. And then, of course, closing that cycle is how we measure results. We have now an initiative at the vice president level, which is basically how we can measure effectiveness in many of the actions that we conduct. Then, of course, talking about effectiveness in adaptation is a very complicated topic that there is not one way to do it. There are different aspects, different approaches to measure effectiveness on adaptation. We're started to looking into, and then of course, part of the conversation today is basically how are we doing that? So next, please. So for us, there are 4 key priorities, which are basically the first on how we move risk assessment to implementation, how we integrate resilience into national development plans, as I said before. Then improving the use of technology and data. Technology and data are very important for decision making. And then, of course, how we mobilize finance and insurance solutions, for example, at the national level. Now, in the case of Latin America, this can be reflected in 3 key takeaways, which is what I would like to talk to you in this slide. Then, of course, projects to programs. It is important that we consider the work at a program level. If we have a standalone projects, the impact is very limited. We need to work on programs so that because all the sectors are connected, if you're talking about resilience in the agricultural sector, maybe you need to talk about resilience in the water sector. At the same time, you need to talk about resilience in biodiversity, in nature capital. So everything is interconnected. So we need to make sure that we build programs, and those programs fit to the purpose of development and also building resilience at the whole state level. Some of the examples that we have of these programs is Ready and Resilient, which is a regional program that was launched last year that basically looked into the whole spectrum of specific actions at a country level, pretty much centered on communities, pretty much centered on strategic work at the sectoral level, data, and information on climate. Then how we embed those results in a learning process. As I mentioned before, effectiveness is one of the concepts that we're working on right now, and also trying to understand what is the role of local communities in adaptation, which is also important. I think that many of the presentations talk about that. In particular, when we're talking about rural areas in which you have a combination of production in agricultural areas and also protected areas, how is that communities play a role in leveraging information, data, and how that is used for decision making. And then, of course, the third point is on leveraging finance to scale results. On that particular point, I think that is important that we start gathering data from the field on how is that the different instruments, financial instruments, are being combined. For example, we here at IDB have what we call policy-based loans and policy-based results loan that basically is based on policy. So what are those combination of policies that are more effective in order to make some transformational changes for adaptation and climate resilience, and how these particular type of finance instruments can be combined, for example, with specific investments. So the combination of the different financial instruments to make sure that the country can push forward a transformational process at the whole state level is really important. One of the examples that I want to share with you is the Caribbean Multi-Guarantor Debt for Resilience Facility that was launched in COP30 last year. And basically, this initiative has 3 goals. One is to scale up debt for resilience swaps to generate fiscal space for enhanced resilience. This initiative was launched with the private sector and also 2 other banks, the CDB, the Caribbean Development Bank, and the CAF. And that's a way to show how the coordination among different institutions can be combined. So that's also one of the goals, strengthening coordination among all of us, making sure that we blend private and public capital and use it to help countries in the adaptation process. And then also improve transparency, monitoring, and evaluation standards to attract more investment. So this is a way also to work together in KPIs and also frameworks to report on how countries are advancing the process. And before going, I also wanted to share with you a couple of, let's say, points that in our experience and based on all the work that we have been conducting in the region are important. The first is that measure how much climate risk and vulnerabilities are actually reduced is important. We need to make sure that we measure, that we gather data, and that we use that as part of the decision-making process. Also, the use of multi-level indicators in which we capture process, actions, outcomes, and impacts. But this needs to be fit for purpose. That means that it needs to be embedded within a development goal, with a development process. one of the concerns is that if we have too many indicators, then we won't be able to measure, because it will be all shared, all spread around many directions. So we need to make sure that whatever we measure is fit for purpose. The third is to ensure measurements are context specific and participatory. The fourth is that we establish frameworks, use frameworks or establish frameworks. Otherwise, we're going to end up with too many frameworks, and countries are going to be, moving in different directions. So let's try to use frameworks that already exist that make sense for the countries. And also combine quantitative data with qualitative data and community-based measures, as I mentioned before. And last but not least, it is important that we track governance quality, learning capacity, and long-term outcome resilience indicators, so that we can make a track of how the countries are building that adaptation process to get to long-term climate resilience. And with that, I will close it, and thank you again for the kind invitation.
Thank you so much, Alfred. We really appreciate those insights. We are here with only a few minutes left. I do want to open the floor now quickly for any last interactive questions from the participants, for our country panelists, or for Alfred with the MDB perspective. Please drop your questions in the chat. And panelists, if there are any questions that have come through that you want to jump on and respond to, please feel free. I might have missed a few as they've been coming in during the entire session. I do think we can share. Brittany, are we able to share the presentation materials with the whole group?
Yes, and the webinar will be, the recording will be put online as well.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, I don't see any new questions jumping in. I know it's been a long session, but we really appreciate all of your attention. It was great to hear the insights from these different perspectives on resilience and adaptation. And just as we close here, I'll just draw together a few themes that emerged today. First, we know that adaptation finance really must move beyond the project-by-project approaches towards a more programmatic and system-level integration, particularly within ministries of finance and national development planning processes. All of our speakers today kind of noted that integration with local planners. Second, evidence is most powerful when it's embedded into systems and not sitting in reports. We heard from the Adaptation Fund and how they use learning to reinforce country ownership and institutional capacity. We learned how CIF has used evaluation and evidence to redesign its resilience programming under the new ARISE program. We heard how countries from Angola, Rwanda to Belize are applying lessons and evidence to inform planning and policy and to communicate across relevant ministries. And we heard how MDBs are translating evaluation insights into investment pipelines for resilience. And lastly, we know that private sector engagement remains both a challenge and an opportunity for resilience building, and evidence can really help de-risk those investments and clarify those value propositions and strengthen enabling environments for investors. Ultimately, if adaptation is about managing risk under uncertainty, then evaluation and learning are how we reduce that uncertainty over time. On behalf of CIF and the Adaptation Fund, I want to thank our speakers, our country partners, our MDB colleagues, and all the participants today for contributing to this important conversation. We hope this isn't the end of the dialogue, and it's really part of a continuing community of practice as we're committed to building evidence-based programming in resilience. So thank you so much for your engagement, and we look forward to working together with all of you in the near future. Thanks so much and take care.